Well, it has been a crazy and stressful week. So I want to ask, how are you feeling today? How are you holding up? I hope you're feeling positive and hopeful. This morning, I want to reflect on some hard realities we still face, but also offer a perspective of hope. I attended two meetings earlier in the week, well before the election had been decided. Both were Zoom gatherings with some minister colleagues. Now, I don't know what your opinion is of ministers, but trust me, they're just like anybody, very human, same hopes and fears as everyone. And the mood at both of those meetings felt a lot like attending the wake of a dear friend who'd been sick for a while, but who wasn't actually dead. Yet it was clear that the friend's condition was so bad that it was pretty disheartening. Just to be clear, the friend they were mourning was the state of our nation in the midst of this election, the polarization between people. In these meetings, the ministers were struggling. They said things like, how do I talk with people about this regardless of who wins? What do I say to my church members? Where do we even go from here? To say the least, there was lots of anxiety and dread. It's obvious many of those ministers were hoping Joe Biden would win. They made it clear that if that happened, as indeed it did yesterday, on the one hand, they'd be happy and relieved, but on the other hand, they understood that whoever might win, we still face huge divisions in our relationships with people in our lives, family members, friends, neighbors, and more broadly, division in our entire country. That's where all of that anxiety came from. Chances are, regardless of where you are politically, you have felt that too. Even if you did a victory lap yesterday, it can be hard to process the fact that roughly half the people in our country cannot quite understand what the other half is even thinking. It's not where any of us want to be. We all know the election in itself did not magically cure our great divide, where over the past 4 years we've had so many of our neighbors and family members and friends so at odds with each other and with us that we can be afraid to hold a civil conversation with them. And that reality really stinks. The election, I think and hope and pray, is a big first step toward reclaiming more civility and mutual understanding and unity, but the divisions clearly run deep, and healing those wounds is not something many of us feel equipped to handle. Even the ministers in those meetings didn't feel equipped. But during one of those meetings, one of my favorite people, our United Church of Christ conference minister, Bill Worley, said something very wise. He said, don't let external forces drive your internal spirit. I agree with Bill on that, so I've been focused on two things in the past few days, and especially since yesterday. First, how can I focus on my internal spirit? And secondly, where can I find hope that nurtures not only my own spirit, but that equips me to do something to heal our divisions? So let's first talk about nurturing our internal spirits. For me, that begins with mindfulness. It's often associated with meditation, but meditation just might not be your thing. That's okay. You can still be mindful. For me, mindfulness is simply being aware, alert, being fully where you are and fully with someone else if you're with someone else. You just are. Mindfulness is clarity in the midst of all the noise. And it's peace when you feel despondent and afraid and at your wits' end. Now, if that sounds unattainable, you're wrong. In fact, you've probably already experienced moments when you've been going along through your day immersed in your thoughts, and then, for reasons you can't quite explain, you're compelled to stop and just take in and be grateful for where you are and how you're feeling. You realize, wow, this is a good moment I'm in. I'm glad to be here. That's mindfulness. So what does mindfulness have to do with how we can respond to what's happening right now? Well, first of all, we really don't have any choice but to find ways to live in peace with people we don't understand or agree with socially or politically. We cannot ignore or avoid those people or hope our differences will melt away all on their own. As people of faith, goodwill, compassion, and love, it is up to us, it is our calling, to reach out and listen and seek to understand and build trust. And that being said, while we go about that work, one person, one neighbor, one friend, one family member at a time, it's never our calling to tamp down on our own convictions. It's important for me to listen and to understand someone who disagrees with me, and to make sure that that person knows they're being heard and understood, and to build trust with them. But it is equally important to stand up for what I believe. That can be a difficult conversation to have, but avoiding difficult conversations only leads to greater misunderstanding. Martin Luther King said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." So I don't intend to stay silent about what matters. I'm going to be honest. But I also intend to demonstrate love to those who disagree with me. I will seek common ground, the values we all share. I'll find the joy in their lives and I'll celebrate it with them. I'll find the sorrow in their lives and mourn with them. I'll be mindful about the moment that I'm in with them, alert, awake, responsive, and God willing, at the very least, a productive, respectful, civil dialogue can be opened. Jesus never used the word mindfulness because it was not in his or anyone else's vocabulary 2,000 years ago. What he says is, be prepared, be alert, be awake, because you don't know, nobody knows, the day or the hour when the bridegroom will come and invite you to the party. He's making an analogy about when the kingdom of heaven will appear. Now, back then, folks are very interested in that question. Their hope was God would send a Messiah to rescue them from their fear and anxiety, their divisions, and restore things to their proper order. Now, what they didn't understand, but what Jesus came to teach them, was that the kingdom of God they all anticipated was not something in the future, but a way of being in the present. That's why he says it comes at any day or hour. And when it does arrive, Jesus says, the kingdom itself is not the kind of kingdom they expect. It's not a political dynasty. It's not defined by borders. It is a realm of peace, where enemies become friends, strangers treat each other as neighbors, old animosities become irrelevant, differences fade in the light of all that we have in common, and the big picture is finally grasped and embraced, that God's love binds all of us together. The sacred genius of Jesus is that he demonstrated over and over again what that mindfulness looks like. It's like the blind receiving sight. It's when thousands are fed from just a few morsels of food. It's when foreigners and heretics are welcomed to the dinner party. It's when a father embraces a wayward child. It's when anyone who's walking around as if they're dead inside is reawakened to the touch and the miracle of being alive. And that brings me to the second task before me, and I think for all of us. Where can I find signs of hope that nurture not only my own spirit, that not only gives me reason to celebrate, but that equips me to do something positive to heal our divisions? We don't need to look very far to see plenty of examples. The amazing hope-filled reality of this week is that so many of our fellow citizens cared enough about our nation that they voted in greater numbers than ever before. More people of color, more young people, more women, more everybody. All over the country, people stood in line for hours and hours, wrapped around city blocks. Sometimes in the rain they stood all day, in the middle of a pandemic that's killing 1,000 people a day. Our neighbors strapped on a mask and they voted anyway. Why? Because they care deeply about who we are and the values we stand for. Because they believe in and they love our country. The hope-filled reality is that in spite of what many feared, and in spite of irresponsible messages coming from the highest levels of government, there was no violence at polling places. Just the opposite. People showed up in droves and behaved like determined grown-ups who cared about the lives of their fellow citizens and about the future that we all share in common. The hope-filled reality is that mail-in ballots got counted with relatively little fuss. It was all very orderly and according to the law. Elle and I spent Wednesday afternoon at the courthouse sorting and processing ballots. It was lovely and even inspiring to be part of that and to see how well democracy works. The hope-filled reality is that for the first time in history, a woman was elected vice president of the United States, a black woman, an Indian American woman, the daughter of immigrants. If those facts don't bring you hope and nurture your spirit, I'm not sure what will. If that's not reason to celebrate and to feel proud of who we are and to give profound thanks for how many of our fellow citizens love our country, I'm not sure what is. But wait, there's more. I came across an editorial this week in the New York Times. It was written by Rachel Harris and Lisa Tarchak, and it was called, "What Does It Mean to Love Your Country?" They quoted people answering that question this week, and they were from all walks of life, both Republicans and Democrats. So here are just a few examples. Emmett Schuyler in Brooklyn said, "Love is not passive. It's not a sit back, relax, and enjoy the show kind of deal. To love this country is to look clear-eyed at its promises and its practices, working to bridge the gap between them. We are a nation, in Bob Dylan's words, that is busy being born. Love is a belief not only in what has come, but in the growth that lies ahead. Without it, we are busy dying." Joel Griffiths of Mapleton, Utah said, "To me, love of country is to be gladly anchored to values and customs that are shared by fellow citizens. It's to yearn to try shrimp and grits in South Carolina, to see a game at Fenway, taking in some jazz in Chicago, and watching waves crash against a western coast shore." He says, "I've never felt so pitted against my fellow citizens as I do now, but I manage it by reflecting on Lincoln's observation that a house divided itself cannot stand. So I resolve to mend divisions." Jennifer Spillane of Fort Lauderdale said, "I think my love of the U.S. in the same way I think I love my parents and son and husband, a sort of warts and all kind of love. I do become disillusioned. But what restores my faith? I look for helpers. I donate time at the local dog shelter, and I remind myself of all the really, truly good people in this wonderful, irritating country of ours." And Lisa Bolton of Nashville said, "I'm inspired by the golden rule. To love one's neighbor as oneself. The dawning realization that here on earth we are all one another's neighbors." And I remember the words of Anne Frank. Not long before her death at the hands of pure evil and ignorance, she said, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." These are our fellow citizens. So we can have hope, lots of hope. We can celebrate today. And Jesus said at any day or hour, any moment, the kingdom of God can come true. In the midst of anything life throws our way, and we can be sure that life is going to keep throwing stuff our way no matter what. And we can be darn sure that we have our work cut out for us in healing our divisions. But what we have going for us is each other. That was proven this week beyond a doubt. And our deep presence in this moment and purpose and conviction and appreciation for each other is always available. It is right here, but extends into our future so that we can embrace one another in peace, understanding, and love, because we are all fellow citizens of that kingdom.